let's call the meeting to order. Meeting is being taped and will be up on the website along with the transcript tomorrow. Still not being streamed yet. Let's start out with approval of the minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
The minutes of the May 22nd meeting have been posted, are available for all to read, and I move that they be adopted.
Second?
I had a couple suggestions for one of the paragraphs, but what's the best way to do? When you send these around, is it best for us just to come to you if we have suggestions, or do we want to do it here at the meeting?
We could do it in advance, or we could do it now, whichever's,
Okay.
I mean, since they were just posted this morning, there wasn't really time today, so
Okay.
if you have,
Well, I can either, I just thought this paragraph about the contracts with the consultants is a little confusing because it's complicated, and to the uninitiated, I'm not sure they could really follow what we were doing. So I could give you some suggestions now, or
why don't you just give me the suggestions?
Okay.
After we get back, you've got them written out
Yeah,
there, and I
okay.
can take them and make the
Okay.
changes that we need.
okay, good, I'll do that. So when we adopt it, we can adopt it
Subject to
as
those.
amended if you
Right.
choose. Okay. All in favor of adopting the minutes from May 22nd, subject to whatever amendments Commissioner McHugh might come up with? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Topic 3, administration. Elaine Driscoll, welcome. Great to have you here. Karen Schwartzman, thank you. Welcome back. We'll have a little transition period from Karen to Elaine, but this is very exciting, and we're glad to have you here. The executive search. Enrique, do you want to give us a quick status report?
Yes.
But this is for the executive director.
Yes, executive search firm. The two respondents to the first solicitation were notified that solicitation was canceled last week, as discussed. We posted a new solicitation this last Friday, May 26. Responses are due on June 13. As we discussed, we have enhanced procedures for advertising and soliciting responses, and we hope that we get more responses this time around.
Okay, and it's out, so it's out?
It's out, it's posted in our website, it's posted in Compass as required. It's being distributed to a number of firms by email with reference to the website and Compass, which is a robust procedure, and
Right. Okay.
we'll see how the responses are.
Just, what communication did we have with the two bidders that submitted the first time around? Are they encouraged to rebid? I know we
Absolutely.
talked about that, but did we communicate with them directly?
By email.
Okay.
Which is, in writing essentially, for records, advising them that the solicitation was canceled, not because of anything else other than that we received only 2 responses, and that staff had looked at their solicitation for compliance to the required forms, and they had been in full compliance, but that nobody had evaluated their proposals on their merits.
Okay.
With that language, I really hope that they are encouraged and advise them that there would be an upcoming solicitation. With all those 3 factors, I really hope that they feel encouraged to rebid.
Okay.
And it was clear to them that we hadn't reviewed their proposals and made any judgments on them?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. For whatever it's worth, I didn't get any questions from either of them after that, if that's a good indication.
Okay. Good. All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. I'm going to rearrange these, if it's okay with everybody, and do 3D, which is the discussion of internal policies, before we get to additional hires, because they will relate, some of the additional hire questions relate to that. So we have a number, I think, of policies on the agenda. Commissioner Zuniga, do you want to lead this, at least the beginning of this?
Sure. I have drafted 2 policies and I'll speak to the technology resources first. We will be later recommending purchases of mobile devices. We have been using computers and networks, etc. And I thought it was pertinent for us to consider and adopt an information technology resources policy. This policy is modeled after the Treasurer's policy. I happen to be familiar with that coming from that department. It essentially outlines that the business use and gives guidelines for personal use of any kind of devices. There is a clear no expectation of privacy language there, as a reminder to every user that even though there will be a limited personal use allowance, if you will, that nobody should ever expect to have any privacy on any communication that goes through any of these devices, the network, the PDAs, or the computers. And the obvious prohibited acts in terms of visiting websites or usage. The way this is written is meant to be supplied to employees and have employees acknowledge and receipt of this policy, which is, again, what I submitted for consideration.
Any comments, questions?
It's a pretty standard policy. It's a policy that has roots in the policies used elsewhere in state government, and it seems to me like a good and sound policy.
How does it deal with accessing one's private email from one's office computer?
Right.
I mean, that is presumably exempt from these? If you have a Gmail account and you access your Gmail account for personal email, is that exempt from this?
Well, I would refer to this notion of business use and personal use. And this policy is an all-encompassing policy in terms of information technology resources. So there's hardware and software. There's network, programs, but also equipment and computers. And there's a reality out there for personal use. Sometimes it's just easier, to send an email that you're going to pick up milk on your way back home. So there's a reality to that effect. But the other reality is that nothing should be expected to be fully private if we're using any kind of equipment, software, or network. There's nothing wrong with certain personal items eventually being available, if you will. But this should be a consideration for every individual, for them to decide just what they use for personal, or whether they have a separate device and network altogether for their personal use.
But it's also true, isn't it, that this policy envisions limited use
Personal use,
of the office equipment and tools for personal
Yes.
use.
Right.
So that the and the use of the personal email would fall within that general exception. Not prohibited. There are times when you need to do it, but it's an occasional use.
I don't know whether this really matters or not. I think this is probably an issue that governments everywhere are trying to figure out how to deal with. But this says that all email accounts, information, messages, et cetera, that are sent, received, stored in the commission's email system are sole property of the commission and not property of the employee. Does the personal exemption that you're talking about, there's two kinds of, you can use your state email occasionally for incidental personal stuff. I understand that, and if you do that, you're subject to its being public state property. But if you use your state equipment to access a private email account, does that also then bring that private email account into the ownership of the public?
I have an example that may be illustrative of just what we're trying to figure out. There's software and equipment out there that downloads itself to computers without you even knowing. So this happened to a colleague where I was. They brought their personal cell phone and decided to charge it to their state computer just for, just to have it charged, to have it powered. And there's a sync computer process that resulted in all of the pictures that this person had in their cell phone, which was personal, residing on the network. Now, on the state network. Now, of course, this wasn't her intention, but because of this technology, if you will, those pictures, and they were not, they were just pictures that anybody takes. The intention was not to have those pictures in the state network, and they were removed. But the point is, usage of either network, software, or hardware when it comes to state property should not be presumed to be personal or carved out. For that example, I am of the opinion that for myself, I'd like to have all my pictures separately on my own device if I choose to, as opposed to in any other device.
One can extract from that, I think, two principles. One that the use of the personal computer, which this policy embodies, use of the state computer for personal use ought to be minimized, and that means accessing personal email accounts and the like. And secondly, that the state system may back up messages or other kinds of things automatically, whether or not, I don't know that this is true, automatically when one is sending them, whether on a personal or a work email account, and if they're backed up on the state system, they're not private. I mean, I think those are two principles that come out of this. Minimize the use. It doesn't automatically mean that your whole private email account is now subject to the state system, but it does mean that if the state system automatically backs stuff up, then the stuff that's backed up is part of the state system. It's in the state domain.
But if it isn't, you would say it isn't. If you've just used it as a way to get out, say it's, I don't no idea where my this is funny because at my wife's suggestion, I set up a separate new Gmail account in order to interact with my family and a lot of my friends and so forth, because she didn't think it'd be a good idea for me to be using Stadium Mail for that sort of incidental stuff. But I do check that during the day sometimes, and we can find out whether it gets backed up on the state system, and then if it is, we can make our own decision about how to handle that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it does not get backed up on the state system, and you merely use the state can get out into a private account, can we be, maybe we should be explicit. I mean, I think, is it the intention of this that not be made public property and accessible to the public? And B, if that's the case, maybe we should be explicit about that we are trying to figure out how to give people some opportunity, particularly with all the scrutiny that we're going to be going through and all the public records requests and all sorts of stuff. Seems like we need to figure out whether we can have a way to access private electronic communications from our office that is truly private.
I think use of a personal device would be the best way to do that,
Right.
Frankly, if I were a planner. And that the minimization of state equipment for private use ought to be the rule that we follow. That would be my view of it. We can discuss that further, but it seems to me to try to write in to a policy for use of public equipment, a series of regulations for using the public equipment for private purposes would be both internally confusing and self-defeating. So I would recommend that we keep this policy at a minimization of use of public equipment for private uses level, and let that be it. And use private devices for accessing private stuff.
This is very consistent with other policies I'm familiar with and have had to adhere to over the years. Very similar language, the message being that nothing used on the state system is private. So I would concur with Commissioner McHugh that if you really have an issue with anyone looking at anything that you've accessed, it's probably a good idea to use your own private smartphone.
So I'm gonna have to get a smartphone. Damn.
I have one quick question. Under the prohibited acts, you talk about access online gambling sites or gaming sites. Obviously, I'm obviously not sitting at my computer playing a gambling game, but when you mean gaming sites, do you mean the corporate gaming sites of any of the interested potential casino license applicants?
No. Actually, this language really comes from the Treasurer's Office, where it's assumed that somebody could go and gamble on a gambling site.
Okay.
Now, there's language there relative to the extent that it's use of, for business purposes, research.
Okay.
Clearly, could be, we should be in the business of finding other jurisdictions, et cetera, and it's a very powerful tool to visit websites.
Okay.
As long as it's related to the business
Okay.
of the commission, which clearly we are in the business of gaming and gambling.
Thanks.
I had a couple of minor word edits, which you can do with as you
Okay.
see fit.
Okay.
So should we adopt it formally? I guess we should, right? Do we need a vote to adopt it?
That was my intention in terms of submitting. So we can be reflected that I make a motion to adopt a policy relative to information technology resources as presented.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next.
I also had a second policy, but really this brings up a question relative to all policies, or there's a number of policies, but let me talk about a hiring policy, which we will soon face, or we have already been facing the need to, for additional hires. I have drafted a hiring policy that currently our outside counsel has looked at, and they gave us comments, I think late Friday, not with enough time to present it for the packet for discussion. But I will speak to it now, and the gist of the policy, of the hiring policy, is to have or designate a hiring manager who will serve as the manager and can draft or modify a job description for whatever the need that has been identified is. And have another role, a secondary role for a human resource type who will conduct an initial screening, the search, etc., be the intake for resumes or whatever may come as a result of that hiring, and work with the hiring manager to support he or her in the role of hiring. Those two roles are explicit in this policy, which is a sound management process as well. Because the second party can have those conversations, including up to on negotiating salary, for example, separate from the hiring manager, who is ultimately making a decision on, the final candidates and interviewing and ranking them in the end. Although it's not here in final draft form, I think that the general thought of that is the idea behind a hiring policy, one that we should discuss and have and consider as we continue to hire or begin hiring.
Where is this a policy that some other agency uses?
Yes. Yeah, these, I also took from the Treasurer's Office. I am very familiar with those policies. In addition to what I just outlined, this policy deals explicitly with the reality of recommendations. For example, that there will be no oral recommendations. All recommendations for anybody will be in writing and will be part of the personal file. It also deals with how procedures to entice and enhance a diverse pool of applicants and communicate that. That's a big reason behind having a human resource type be the person who is not making decisions about the hire, but is the one drumming up interest, doing the first screening, meeting the fundamental or the basic qualifications to present to the hiring manager. So it's one that has been reviewed recently as well by the Treasurer's Office. I'm sure there's other models out there, but the basic features are just what I described.
It sounds like a sound policy. I guess my only concern would be, I think what you're probably referring to is an executive director who will then do most of the hires for the commission, conduct most of the hires, and I just don't know if there's other models that are used in other gaming jurisdictions that may make some sense. I think that it's important that we have procedures. I guess I'm worried about codifying a policy that may not be exactly what someone will need in the future
Right.
to hire
Well,
appropriately.
And let me speak to this. It's presumed, which is why we really need to have that in writing in front of us to really look and study it, perhaps. But a hiring manager would be designated for a position, perhaps, if the commission determines that. And someone else may be designated for another position. Or when an executive director comes in, that person may serve as a hiring manager for a number of positions, given the role that he or she will be in. The idea, so in other words, there will not be necessarily one hiring manager that's going to be doing all the hiring. The idea of the policy is that for a particular position or set of positions, there will be a person ultimately that is functioning in the role of a hiring manager. Does that?
No, I like the concept. I'm a little concerned. For example, we have an executive director and we're looking to hire someone, maybe a chief investigator. Well, certainly I would want to be part of that process in some way. And I don't know that this policy allows for that to happen.
Right.
That's my only concern, is if we're too, it has to be an
Right.
HR person that assists. So
Nope.
I'm wondering if
Nope.
it's, okay, it could
No,
be
it
someone
could be,
else.
it could
Okay.
be determined at any point, and maybe the best way to do this is to table the discussion until we have the written policy, which is why things get
Right.
written. But the way at least I was trying to explain it was that two roles will be presumably, that there's two distinct roles, but there could be two different people in each role at any given point, including a commissioner, or anybody else, in the future.
Which is what we've done a couple of times.
Right.
I was designated to
Correct.
close the deal with Elaine and
Correct.
so forth.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, in general principles, I think, this is fine. I agree that we need to see the document. we're in such a weird situation now. We're
Yes.
hiring people on onesies and twosies. We're doing it. At some point, there'll be an executive director. We'll be hiring them by the tens and dozens. It's going to be a whole different process. And Jim and I, Commissioner McHugh and I, have had a lot of experience with talking about robust HR systems and processes that will handle a substantial flow of paper and people, which may, be a little bit different from this. But we can certainly change as we go along. I mean, nothing we adopt is going to be cast in stone. If we think we did something wrong, we can fix it or change it for new circumstances or whatever. So, Commissioner?
I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that we can change these things as we go forward, and the policies we institute initially are not necessarily, or even in some cases, probably the policies we'll wind up with. But we really are faced now with and this bleeds a little bit into a broader discussion. We're faced with the need to hire a number of people. We're interviewing, Janice is interviewing some, there's some others being interviewed, there are others that we're going to need to get in the near term. And I wonder if it doesn't make sense to take a look at the general policies, personnel policies, that some of the good agencies that have been in business in the Commonwealth for a long time have, and do a quick sort of inventory and review of those policies. 85 to 95% of what they do is what we are going to be doing. And there are places where we'll need enhanced energy, background checks, privacy, code of ethics, and basically look at some of these other agencies, look at their portfolio of policies, think about, in a fairly short term, adopting those policies as our own after a review, and then concentrating on the areas where we really need to concentrate some energy and focus those as add-ons or fill-ins to the policies. Get these things in place, get the people that we need in place under those policies, and then as we proceed, make the modifications that we need and that circumstances dictate as we go forward. I think we could probably have a fully fleshed out policy manual with leave policies and vacation policies and everything else in place in 2 or 3 weeks. Two is too quick probably, but in 3 weeks. And then we move forward and get the people that we need as we need, without having to stop each time we do that and say, we've got a policy that covers what we need to do for this person. So I'd throw that out as a possible approach to what we're doing here and how we move forward in doing it. I mean, we don't have to vote on that today, but if we could begin the process of mining the libraries of the good agencies and departments around the Commonwealth, get some good model sets, come up with a proposal and present a package for us to think about. And then we'd see how they'd all interrelate to each other too, because some of these policies will interrelate and they don't make sense as standalones unless you know what else is with them. So.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I have access and have copies of the treasurer's policies. Collectively, they're called the employee manual. And I know, for example, the comptroller's office is huge on documentation. They must have their own policies in place as well. So, there's two right there that would be very readily available for us, but there could be others that could either be very similar or equally accessible. I had the initial thought of, if we're going to do hiring, let's do the hiring policy, but there are many that really it's just a matter of reading through them and agreeing.
And hiring policy would be a subset within that personnel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the several policies.
And because we have that one's right on the horizon, I mean, we could take again, given the fact that we're so far down the path, we could do that one in isolation, so we can get people on board consistent with the policy and the background checks and the like. But then, rather than do these things two a week, just have the next round be a sort of a robust policy manual.
So you're not saying we should halt hiring until that's
No,
done?
no.
Keep doing it
Right, but
Okay, yeah.
do
Yeah.
this other piece as quickly as we can.
Well, you know, it raises another question, and this is going to occur in a lot of different areas. On one level, we're not really ready for an HR director, but we will be soon enough. It's going to happen probably quicker than we think. I wonder whether we should, and it's true of general counsel, it's true of a lot of different people. We're trying to sort of hold back a little bit on making major hires until we at least begin to see the shape of an organization chart and so forth. But we can only go so far in that, and I wonder whether we ought to get an HR professional in to, the first thing they would do is put together the personnel manual.
Well, we'd have to have something in place to hire the personnel manager. So, and our consultants, our gaming consultant does have a place in its plan for the immediate hires that we need to do. And so if we put in place the structure to support those hires, hire the people they tell us we need, and then ultimately, when we get an HR person, that person can revise the policies in conjunction with the executive director and fine tune them, but at least we have a structure in place that's a structure that's proven to be reliable by its use in other departments and agencies, and we move forward on safe and firm ground without having to reinvent each of these policies as we go forward. So if we did that, I think we'd be on pretty firm ground.
I'm fine with, Commissioner Zuniga, would you take the lead on trying to pull together the
employee manual
best
type,
practice
the best.
manual stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll do you sounds like you've got a hiring policy already, we can see probably for next week.
Yes.
But then be moving as quickly as we can down some kind of at least a basic personnel manual.
Yep.
And we'll see, there's a lot of questions about key hires, and, we don't have to deal with that at the moment, but it's gonna come on us pretty soon. But I agree with Commissioner McHugh, we can get moving on the personnel thing. I think that's good. Push personnel manual, I think that's a good idea. There was a public records response procedure that was circulated. I don't know who this came from. Was that not meant to be one of the?
Right, that's not on for today. I think.
That's not on for
No,
today?
no,
Right,
it's not.
no.
Okay,
Nope.
okay. Then the other one that we wanted to talk about a little bit is background checks. We have already established the policy that we will do background checks on all hires, and we've now added to that we won't announce anybody until those background checks are done. And that process is working pretty well. The state police are doing them for us. We're paying for them. Commissioner Cameron has been managing that process. But the question is raised whether we need the full background check that we've been using until we get our own policies in place and our own customized background documentation as well as policies. We've been using the standard background check form that the governor uses for critical positions for everybody. But the question was raised as we go now about to step off into hiring some new executive assistant type people, whether we really need to go through all that. And I asked Commissioner Cameron to look into that and to see if she can make a recommendation on that while we're waiting for the full plan.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am in the process of looking at that. In fact, I was looking at it before being asked to. Had several conversations with the state police, and the group that we're using from the state police are the troopers who actually conduct background investigations for the governor's office. Now, we've made a financial arrangement to use their time, some of their time differently, and we'll be paying them for those services. We have modified a form that the governor's office uses. It's a comprehensive background investigation. In fact, Director Driscoll just went through that process, so she could adhere to the fact that it's pretty comprehensive. And we've been doing a corporate investigation for our consultants. So all the consultants we've hired to date, that's 4 sets of consultants, have all gone through a corporate background investigation. And one of the things I have spoken to the state police about is a modified version, not as intense, for the various levels of employees. Now, for example, I'm aware in New Jersey, there are 3 levels of background investigations, depending on the background itself and the level of responsibility for that employee. Certainly, an executive assistant would fall into that lower level of background investigation. It wouldn't be as extensive in some ways with, the extensive tax records. I mean, just some of the levels of questions, family members and their tax returns. So there's some areas in which it can be streamlined. And so I'm in the process right now of discussing it with the state police here and getting formats from other gaming jurisdictions. So I think within a week I should be able to provide an outline of levels of investigations that are used in other jurisdictions successfully that we can modify and use here. It does make sense to use our resources wisely and have a couple of levels of background investigation.
Okay. And we'll be bringing on an executive assistant probably soon, so.
We'll have this
you can
system
give us-
in place for that hire. I
Okay.
know that we're at least a week away, so I'm waiting for a couple of jurisdictions to talk through why they do things the way they do that and make a recommendation that makes sense for us.
Okay. One thing I forgot was, have we decided on a title, Elaine Driscoll? Did we?
Director of Communications.
Director of Communications, okay, good. I didn't know that. Is there a,
We had discussed, you should consider, we had discussed the possibility of calling the position Director of Communications and Outreach. So it's just an option which you can decide.
Yeah.
If you like or don't. I don't think I ever raised it with people, that's what we had thought
Yeah.
about, or someone had suggested it, and some of us thought that was a good idea.
well, I think we're sort of, at the moment, we're sort of thinking that outreach and strategy would be a part of this, yeah. And I think that's what we've talked about also. So as far as I'm concerned, if that's something that you're comfortable with, and it's, it does encapsulate what we consider to be part of the mandate, I think. So, fine with me. Everybody else?
Sounds great, Mike.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think we're fine for background, and just for the public to know, we continue, there will be background checks for everybody. There will be in the interim, until we get a really full, robust background system in place, there will be some amount of tiering for more junior people. The most of the time we'll be using the standard form. One thing I thought about reading the governor's form with a new eye, as I saw this, there was nothing on about conflicts of interest relative to gaming companies. Maybe that's already been adapted, but in potential conflicts, for obvious reasons, the governor's form wouldn't necessarily say, do you or any of your family have any relationships with gaming companies or something like that. And if that isn't in our standard form.
We did modify that form.
Okay.
Slightly to include some questions along those lines.
Okay,
we'll-
so that's covered, okay,
Yes.
okay, great. Anything else on policies or background checks or anything? Okay, so let's then go to 3C, which is the additional hires. We mentioned that Janice is working on some administrative people, executive assistant type admin people, and there'll be a pipeline of some number ready pretty soon. The other one that we've been working on, and I've been leading on this, but I've been working with mostly Commissioner Zuniga, but also Commissioner McHugh and even Commissioner Stebbins earlier on. We've had the idea, originally we had the idea of the interim executive director. We've decided not to pursue that title, but we have agreed as a consensus sort of that we ought to see if we can find some senior level support that will do a lot of what was envisioned for the interim executive director, less a lot of the particular gaming expertise. from my standpoint, and what we've said several times, that we're not quite clear on what this job is, and I've said that to the people we've interviewed, but as I'm now seeing it, it's beginning to make some sense to me, particularly in the light of some of the people we've talked about. And I see it as having two dimensions. I think I sent this around in writing, but it's probably even a little fuller now. One is to pick up a lot of all the organizational, IT, HR, procurement, et cetera, stuff like, for example, now pursuing a personnel policy. We really don't want Commissioner Zuniga to spend a lot of time designing a personnel policy. And Janice, we want to free up to support the sort of higher end of the commission's job as we begin to get into that, of thinking about how do we make judgments about casinos and so forth. So one would be to take that whole area of responsibility and own it and take it away largely from Commissioner Zuniga and from Janice. Secondly, would be to be the principal interface with the consultant, particularly the gaming consultants, but with our Gantt chart that we hope to build, that we will build, that will have the whole business that we're doing, the guts of which is this work plan. We're now at week 528, and somebody needs to be sitting there saying, okay, here's all the things we're supposed to do in 528, make sure that it's being done, keep this thing up to date, and so forth and so on. I think that could be a real valuable asset for all of us. And I think there are people out there who could do that well. What we have said presumptively to people when we've talked to them, we've interviewed them, is that this would be an interim position, but we haven't been didactic about that. I mean, if somebody says, I can't do an interim position, either because where I am now won't let me out, or because I don't want to, we've said, Commissioner Zuniga and I have talked about being willing to be flexible on that if we think we found the right person. Because it's pretty likely that if a person is good in this job, we're going to want to keep them no matter who else comes on board. So from my standpoint, I think we're ready to adopt a more explicit go-forward strategy on this. And if I'm the right person, maybe make me the hiring person for this and finalize, subject to something or other, the approvals and the salaries and so forth with one or more of the people that we're now talking with. So that's where I stand on this hire at the moment.
I think it would be ideal if someone was willing to come in an interim position. Because, again, we're just starting to look at the organizational chart and what we'll need. And I guess my only hesitancy is bringing someone in at a high level. And as you pointed out at the beginning, many of those responsibilities, the executive director would have direct responsibility for. So I think I see, in my mind, a little bit of a conflict with someone at a very high level if we had to offer them a full-time position, not knowing what that would be. And it would be hard for someone, I think, to maybe take the job in a full-time capacity, not knowing what the job would be long-term. So those would be my...
Well, it's definitely, I totally agree that the ideal is interim. I just don't know if that's practical with whoever we come up with. And in that situation, I mean, this is really an important issue for all of us to think about. We are increasingly, you and I have talked about this, we are increasingly focusing on vertical categories of the work of the agency, of this commission. Commissioner Zuniga is becoming, the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer, sort of. You're becoming the Deputy Director for Law Enforcement and licensing and so forth. Commissioner Stebbins is doing community relations and economic development, and Commissioner McHugh was our General Counsel. And I could be, relative to this, I could be
The project manager.
I could be the project manager, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to go if we wanted to for the 6 months or so. From my standpoint, that's not a good idea. We don't want to get into bad habits. We need to start figuring out how we think big thoughts about the gaming industry, and again, stuff we've talked about. And there's the research agenda is really a big topic. We need to try to get our arms around the financial analysis of these agencies and where we're going to put casino. That's what we should begin to be thinking about. So if we all agree on that, then that's fine. But maybe we disagree on how we should try to operate unless and until we get staffed up. So the net of it would be with if we could get an interim person, great. If we can't get an interim person, the right person won't do it on that basis. My inclination would be to try to figure out a way that presumptively they would stay on. Because I think it's so important that we have that kind of a person in place. But that's just my thought, and I think we all need to chew on this.
I agree with that, and I think that the right kind of person in my view, would be a person who is really flexible, as in addition to being talented, a person who can come into this environment now and do some of the strong infrastructure things that we need to get done. We need, and I keep harping on this because I look at it every day, we need a good document management system and policy, for example. We need support for Commissioner Cameron in the racing area, not necessarily hands-on support, but identifying the kinds of support that we need there and getting it and overseeing it. So we need somebody who is prepared to come into a startup operation with some background in administration and management and be flexible and put together the components that we need to operate going forward. And that kind of person, it seems to me, if we take that, him or her, on a full-time basis, can easily morph into one of the other positions that we're going to want to have occupied by somebody who's a self-starter and full of energy once we get an executive director on board and get fully stood up. So I guess that's a windy way of saying that if we get the right person now, that right person will fit into the slot that will exist when we're farther down the road and have a more mature organization as well, if we can't find somebody on an interim basis.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is, this is a balancing act that we're weaving. We're trying to find somebody who really has a base set of skills in state government, organizational management, helping us get the organization up and going. I'd love to find somebody who could do it on an interim basis. My worry is when we do hire an executive director, they by statute have the appointing authority to hire, I believe it's a chief administrative financial
CFO.
officer, as well as all of the other top hires. And I guess if I were a candidate on the interim basis, I would be looking for some assurance of where am I going to wind up. And I don't know if we're in a position to necessarily guarantee that. I mean, we look at some of the interim basis, they're, for lack of a better term, the top dog in the agency in a management capacity for a while. And then they may fall down to a second or a third ranking based on whoever our executive director wants to bring in. I mean, it's a cautious approach I think we need to have, but I struggle with it. I struggle with, how much of the interrelationship that they have with our gaming consultant as opposed to doing a lot of the policy and the foundation building for the agency.
Well, there's an inherent catch-22, if you will, if that's what we're talking about. But I believe this is where job descriptions and titles really do matter. And perhaps what we need to do is to draft something to that effect. And whether we call that person a transition administrator, because there's a natural setting up period that we find ourselves in, and with whatever we decide, maybe after that, whether there's guarantees or not, I think we should be talking about that, or maybe discussing it in those terms. To a great degree, we hired director of communications because the need was evident, and and because everybody recognized that, hiring an executive director is going to take time, and we have to do it carefully, et cetera, et cetera. But, and that person is going to have to come in and, interface with at least one director and some of the other staff. So we have to reconcile the need that exists for additional bodies, and with, whether they're at a senior level or at a junior level, with the reality that that there's going to be an executive director who will have a big say into the rest of the organization eventually.
And after working with our gaming consultants and listening to their thoughts on the process of hiring an executive director, I think we can do that in a timely fashion. I really believe that this is not something that has to take 6 months to do. I think that once we have the search firm, we can give clear direction. It's not a large pool of candidates, and I don't think we have to move that forever. So I'm thinking along those lines, as opposed to we're going to need someone now for a long period of time until we can hire that person.
But even if it's 3 or 4 months, I think that our need is there. If we knew to a certainty that this was going to be done in 3 or 4 months, I think we'd still need to have somebody. I think that we all agree that ideal would be interim. That may or may not be practical. If it isn't practical, if we identify the right person and that person will not do it on an interim basis, if the person who we think that person is, then there's going to be, their long suit is going to be Massachusetts state government stuff. That's where we need an awful lot of the help right now. And by definition, our executive director isn't going to know that, because there's nobody in gaming who's from Massachusetts. So I think there'll be a natural fit, and it's a high degree of probability that those people would fit together. And I think we can say if it doesn't work out, then they'll use them for a transition period, and it's not very likely that it wouldn't work out, that there wouldn't be a comfortable fit. We'll be explicit. You're not going to be the executive director. You're not even going to be a candidate because you don't know anything about gaming, and it will be up to the executive director and then you to figure out where you go when that person comes in. But I think it's a safe bet to have a sort of a presumption that we can find a good place for this person. Otherwise, we made a bad hire, in which case we're going to get rid of them anyway.
So are we talking about a director of administration, operations coordinator, transition manager? I'd like to press on the notion of a job description and a title, just to make sure that we are reaching agreement, frankly.
I do agree with you. If more of the responsibilities are on the administrative side of it, I'd invite some more discussion as to how they would actually overlay their work with our gaming consultants and actually monitoring and following the scope of work.
Well, we could call this person, if we wanted a title that would truly depict what the person does, we could call the person the operations setup administrator. What we talked about, I thought, in terms of the chart, was somebody who is experienced in use of a project management tool, not the person who was going to make policy judgments, not the person who was going to make decisions as to the direction in which we go, but the person who was going to take what the gaming consultants and the lawyers were doing in this, and as represented on this rather static diagram, comprehensive but static, transfer it onto a project management tool, incorporate the other activities that we need to do that are independent of what the gaming and legal consultants are doing in the gaming area, and then use it in a dynamic tool that'll tell us where the dependencies are and where we're going as we move forward to get stood up, so that person was really a technician rather than a policy person. That person could be overseen by this setup administrator who would just make sure that person was doing it and it was up to speed. The person who was the operational setup administrator could also be looking for a document management policy and tool, could be looking for the various other administrative functions that we need to have in place over the next 4 or 5 months, so that we, frankly, can get relieved from the kind of day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff that we're doing now and concentrate more broadly on the policy things we need to think about. And then, at the end of that 4 or 5 month period, can morph into wherever the executive director wants him or her to go, and acquire in the process a new title. He or she will have overseen the setup of some rudimentary stuff that's got to be there, and it's got to be there now, but also can take on whatever position, if we're required to hire a full-time person, the executive director thinks would be most helpful on an ongoing basis. So it's that kind of person with that kind of job description, maybe we can fill it out more fully, that it seems to me we could use, even if we had to take him or her on a full-time basis, without encumbering the executive director with a roadblock or an obstacle to shaping the organization the way they wanted to see it. Does that make sense?
It does. I wonder if you get a person to come on board with that kind of a,
Well,
not knowing
what I've
where
been-
you'll end up, not knowing at what position.
That's what we've been saying. I mean,
Right.
and that's people we're talking to, and there are a number of them that are interested, know that is it's either interim or it's that situation that Commissioner McHugh just described.
Yeah.
And they're counting on again, they're counting on their own talents. I think, a good person is going to know they're going to be good, and they're going to settle into a place that's reasonable. I understand, this is a little on the funky side, but that's the business we're in right at the moment, in this weird startup mode. And I think the need is so overwhelming that even though it's a little imperfect and a little fluid, I think it's the best way to go.
Well, perhaps, in the spirit of the hiring policy that again, is drafted, has not been presented in writing, an aspect of that policy was to have whomever would be serving as a hiring manager for any position. We have one or a couple in the future. Draft a detailed job description of that, of the hire that they were to do. So we may need to designate a hiring manager for a position to have it named, to have it be fleshed out, distributed, as opposed to this debate, if you will, in future meetings.
Well, I think we do. I mean, for this one, I think we
Yes.
do. And it probably makes sense to have it be me, because I've been doing the lead on this, but I'm happy to have it be somebody else if you want to. And we can write out a more thorough job description, but I think we know what we're talking about, and there's no need, it's not going to change the conversation a lot to have a more detailed job description. It's not a bad idea to do it, but it's not going to change this discussion, I don't think. So I just, I'd like to have everybody be comfortable with it, and I still see a little bit of reluctance on your face.
It's not reluctance, it's just, I have seen a lot of when roles are ambiguous, it creates conflict. And that's I've seen it in my business an awful lot, and that's my only concern, is having experienced that. Just wanting to make sure I'd hate to have someone come in now thinking their job was going to be X, Y, and Z, and then an executive director come in and say, oh no, that's not your role, and that just to have conflict at that level would be unfortunate. So but I do understand our need, and I know that we can't be perfect right now, because we do have a need. So I'm very cognizant of that, but I just am looking down the road and would love to avoid any kind of conflict at that level.
Well, suppose we had a job description that fleshed out the things that we needed right now, and if we could find a person to do that on a temporary basis, then that's the end of it. If we can't find somebody, the job description would also say that after an executive director comes aboard, the role thereafter will be as the executive director determines, so that the person comes into this position seeing in writing that this is for now and later is for later. And it's something that we all agree to in terms of the short-term components, and it's fair and full disclosure to the person coming in so that she doesn't have any false expectations. And if it's the right kind of person, then that person will subscribe to that. Would that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense.
Okay, I think that's a good idea.
So then, should we have a motion to designate Chairman Crosby as the hiring manager for the administrative position we've been discussing, subject to promulgation of a job description that the commission approves at its next meeting? Do we want to move fast? Well, that's the end.
Yep.
Not a subsequent meeting, yep.
Pardon me? Yeah.
Yep. If that's a motion, I second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion? And I can work with you. If we get a person, I can work with you a little bit to make sure that everything is. Any further discussion on this? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, good. Okay, 3E, Commissioner McHugh, 268A disclosures.
Okay, I have in your packet for discussion only today, a disclosure form that is required by Chapter 268A, Section 6. That is basically a provision of the state ethics law that prohibits an individual from acting on a particular matter. That's a defined term, but it's basically a specific matter in which they may have a personal or financial interest. And if one does that, there are a variety of consequences, unless one does it with approval of the appointing authority. So we need to think about a couple of things, and this form is an example of the kind of thing that we need to think about. We have a law firm now. They are special state employees for purposes of the state ethics laws, so they are subject to these kinds of requirements, as are all special state employees. So we need to think about them in the context of this. We need to think about ourselves in the context of this statute. And we need to think about our own internal employees who may have policy-making roles in the context of the statute. And we are about to embark now on policies that may affect all of us in one way or another. We're about to work on and get going on an expanded and enhanced code of ethics. We're about to embark on policies that'll set vacation time and sick leave time and all those kinds of things, and we will be affected by those policies. So we need to ensure that we have complied with this before we get very far into work on those policies. So next week, I would propose to have for us to sign off on a disclosure form like the one you have as part of your packet for each of the people on the Anderson and Krieger law firm team that's working for us, because we were the appointing authority for the Anderson and Krieger team. By next week, I would hope to have all of us have submitted to our appointing authorities, and I want to talk about who we submitted to if we were appointed by all three. Maybe we have to do it for all three. Maybe we can figure out how to do it by one. But I'd like to have us in a position where we could submit those to our appointing authorities, and finally that we could figure out if there's anybody else who we have hired who will be in a decision-making role with respect to any of those policies for whom we need to approve one of these forms. So today, it's just opening of discussion on the topic. That's the kind of form we're going to have that'll be applicable to all of us, and that's the kind of form we need to move through promptly so that we can undertake the rest of our work. And that's really all I had for today. I didn't need a vote. We don't need a vote today. We just, I'll proceed to put together the packages that we need for next week, and then we move forward.
So Anderson and Krieger here is, okay, this is right, exactly what you're talking about. They're going to counsel us on putting together rules and regulations that may affect them.
Yeah, their specific disclosure is they will give us counsel and advice on this enhanced code of ethics.
Right.
The enhanced code of ethics may say that anybody who's a contractor for the Gaming Commission may do X and may not do Y. Not doing Y may have some theoretical, but nonetheless existent financial impact on them. Therefore, they need to have this kind of a form approved by us, saying that we don't think it's going to affect their ability to give us impartial advice.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's that kind of thing that is on this area.
For my understanding, and as a tie back to the policies that we're talking about, I will be taking as one of the models the Treasurer's Office policies on a number of things: employment hours, vacation, etc. But the idea would be to have a disclosure to our appointment authorities upon adoption of such a policy.
No.
In anticipation.
In anticipation, because this is going to recur and recur and
Yes.
recur. It's going to, well, all the regulations that we
Yes.
adopt may have some impact on us, it's conceivable, as well as everybody else. All of the, a variety of other policies that we create may have an impact on us. So the idea would be to let our appointing authorities know that we're about to embark on this. It's common with all commissions that are in our position, and make sure that they understand what we're doing and have an opportunity to say if they have any reservations. And that's what this is about, and document the fact that we've told them what we're doing and ask for their blessing.
Sounds good. Glad you're watching this. Anything else under just the administration issues? Commissioner Camera, Racing Division, anything else on update? New update?
Just a quick update on last week. We had we hired our racing consultant, Ann Allman, who accompanied me to a series of meetings last week over at the offices of DPL. We met with employees and staff having to do with financial oversight, HR, IT, audits, the chief veterinarian who serves as in a management role now overseeing employees. And we met with former commissioners who gave us a historical perspective on the State Racing Commission, their responsibilities and oversight. Went out to the 2 racetracks on Thursday, spent the morning out at Suffolk Downs, meeting with employees, the president and directors of the New England Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association, owners, trainers out at the track, and the management team of Suffolk Downs. We met with them in the morning, meet and greet, good for me to meet all the individuals involved as well as our racing consultant. And in the afternoon, we were out at Plain Ridge, observed a live race with the racing officials, toured the facilities, met with the owners, management staff, went out to the barns, observed testing procedure, and the staff out there, and very interesting 2 days of kind of an immersion into racing, and I think all the meetings were beneficial to everyone involved. And as of last Friday, we signed off on an additional ISA. allowing the Office of Consumer Affairs to perform the administrative services necessary in order to make those payments from to the owners and lessees of the Greyhound. That's as per Chapter 194 of the Act of 2011, and those payments will go out. We just had to operationally make it possible for Consumer Affairs to take those responsibilities back from the Gaming Commission, and that was all handled as of last Friday. And so we are moving forward with the transition in the best way we possibly can with this bifurcated system of management for the Gaming Commission and the day-to-day operations for Department of Professional Licensure. So a lot of racing last week, and we'll continue on with our transition. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
And you're expecting the report from the consultant when?
Within 4 to 6 weeks, that consulting assignment will be complete, and we'll be able to, at that time, as a full commission, listen to the results and the recommendations from our gaming consultant.
Great.
Sorry, the racing consultant.
Right. Great. We don't have a racing commission anymore, right? So we don't, there's now just, so I'm referring to this as the racing division, I guess. Is that?
Yeah, of the Gaming Commission, I think
Racing,
that's
yeah.
appropriate there.
Right.
We probably do need to distinguish the two.
Right.
So we talk gaming, it is a little bit different than racing, so
Right.
I'm very comfortable with that, Mr. Chair, it makes sense.
All right. Anything else on racing? Commissioner Zuniga, did you have something?
Can I go back to additional hires for a second? We have gotten a couple of inquiries just worthy of discussion relative to summer internships. I believe they're a cost-effective way of having somebody come in and help for a discrete, defined amount of time. I just bring it up as something to consider. It's getting to be that time. I personally happen to feel that to the extent that there's a discrete project for someone or a recurring set of tasks that could help on an interim basis, may be worthwhile. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up as we are talking about job descriptions, maybe worthwhile coming up with one for a couple of 1 or 2 interns that could help on a number of things.
I've done I've met with a young college student who's very interested in interning for us for the summer semester, and I wanted to give him kind of a quick outline of what we would be expecting from him. Some of it will be, no other way to phrase it, but call it grunt work in terms of helping us get organized for our weekly meetings. Commissioner McHugh gave Janice a responsibility of going through, looking at the transcript, matching it up with our tape in terms of assisting with the preparation of our minutes. So I drafted out kind of some basic responsibilities. I passed that along to you and to Janice, and also asked Commissioner Cameron for some help, because I think his entry level as a position as this is, there still should be some requirement of some level of a background check for a young man or woman who wants to intern with us. I know that gets to our broader policy discussion of the different stages and levels of background, but I think we might be able to do something pretty rudimentary, pretty basic, but still put them through a quick background check. But I invite your feedback and share any feedback, I guess, back through Janice about the responsibilities, at least for this one individual, based on where his interests were, but also I know in helping us meet some of the assistance that we need around the rest of the commission.
Is there any, I guess, other than some kind of background, the security issue, is there anything else? Is there any reason not to do this? I guess On the face of it, this seemed like it makes a lot of sense, good for us, good for them. And I'm sure you can handle the details of how to make it happen. But is there any reason not for us not to do this?
No, I think the timing is favorable. Summer is really, some of these people are already off of school year. It is the ultimate interim position. And so as we're talking about, a lot of need out there on an interim basis, it's worthwhile. The flip side is, they require a lot more supervision than a regular, hire by its very nature. So we just have to weigh that. But if we can, start, if we have really started, but can consolidate the semblance of tasks, as opposed to a job description, however discrete they are, or however general they may be, that's a good first step.
I also had a conversation with Janice in terms of access to the building, whether, the person will probably need a card to get by the
Right.
front desk, and then what limitations we can put on the card for the access to the office within certain hours, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Can we
once
do
we
that?
have that information back.
Can we do that?
I think we do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good. Are you comfortable, you're comfortable with that apparently?
Yes,
right?
I
Yeah.
actually met this young man. He is, he was in a couple of times. I like his initiative, and I think he could be helpful, yes. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, you comfortable with that idea?
I am. I also think that there are other co-op programs around town that we might be able to, if this works out, think about other ways to employ some of these really talented, able young people that are around town in the various
Not
colleges
just-
and
yeah,
on
not just-
an ongoing basis. They're terrific, a lot of them.
And not just summers, you're saying?
Not
Yes,
just summers,
during
yeah.
the school
I
year
mean,
as well.
I'm thinking of, on the legal front, you could get
Yeah.
some second or third year law student, for example, that work with the lawyers to do
Right.
some of the organizational work on an ongoing basis.
Like an
and
employee manual,
Some of
for
the,
example.
yeah. There's a lot of things, and I think it's a great resource that we ought to be thinking about.
Okay, so shall we just have a consensus that Commissioner Zuniga will go forward and pull together whatever
Act as a hiring manager, if
Yeah.
you will, for
Yeah.
An intern.
for one or
For an
more-
intern?
One or more interns.
One or more
Right.
interns?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the clear caveat that figuring out some kind of background
Yes, I was
check
working on that today
does
already.
that.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
yeah, good. Okay, number 5, project work plan. Let's see now, we have, I guess we've signed off on everything pretty much. I think all the gaming consultants have signed off. I don't think we have the signed statements of work and contracts back yet, but I think everything went forward fine with them. We clearly have a consensus on putting together a comprehensive project management chart, which will fall under this more senior administrative person. You thought you might have some ideas about people, we haven't been able to find yet anybody who's really skilled in Microsoft Project or one of the other systems who could put this together quickly. And I keep fighting Commissioner Zuniga, who offers to do it. So do we, but you had some, you said you might have some
Yes.
ideas about people who could do that. Did you have a chance to look into that, or?
Yes, no, I have a call into and will follow up with people I know of at Wentworth, who I've had, their construction management program is very robust. They may know of either recent graduates or, they have a number of networks like CMAA, a chapter of Construction Management Association. So I was going to follow up with them to see if they know somebody who may be looking or networks to tap into. In addition to, I have also a call into other people that I know from the School Building Authority who are project managers, who may, again, know of people. They themselves may be interested in providing services to the commission on a firm, as a firm. But that's not necessarily the way we're thinking about it.
Right.
Or
We
at
decided
least
we didn't.
We're not gonna.
We don't want to hire
No.
Price Waterhouse, to help
run
us
our-
staff
our-
this up,
right.
But
Right.
there are plenty of individuals, it's just, or if
Yeah.
there are some individual sort of single
Yeah.
proprietor firms. I sent
Yes.
you a name of one of them.
Right.
If you just Google Microsoft project, they come up. So
Mhm.
we'll
Yes.
keep moving on that.
Yes.
As far as 5B status reports, Commissioner McHugh, do you want to just think quickly on the lawyers?
Well, I guess I want to talk more broadly just about
Okay.
the status report and the mechanism for getting that, those status reports. The lawyers and the gaming consultants have a standing meeting, as I understand it now, every Friday morning to work through the status of where they are. Kristen Gooch is driving that, and then in some fashion, we're going to get the product of that on a weekly basis. I'm meeting with the lawyers on a weekly basis to go through the items on the project chart that we have now in order to see where we are at the end of each week on the things that were supposed to have happened during that week. And then we have created a separate chart, not in quite as much detail for the things that are not on that chart, but will be in the Gantt chart, to make sure we can track those as well, things that are going along in parallel with this. So I think that once we get the Gantt chart up and have all of this integrated, then the reporting mechanism and the contents of the reports we're expecting will be a lot clearer than they are now. But for now, that's the way it's being driven, as I understand it, and we'll get weekly reports from the combined efforts of the lawyers and the gaming consultants on the combined project that they're doing. They already have, as I understand it, a revised Excel chart that shows where they are and some additional things that they've parceled out. So we'll be able to keep track of things beginning next week, I hope, in that fashion, by looking at week's end, what was supposed to happen, what did happen, and make the necessary adjustments.
Do you anticipate that one or more of us would attend that Friday meeting?
No. They're working, it's a Wednesday meeting.
Oh, that's a Friday.
Wednesday meeting. And what I understand is that out of that will come a report to us.
Okay.
And we need to cinch down the form that result is going to take and how it's going to, what it's going to cover. But the first of those meetings is tomorrow, and
Okay.
they have a very full agenda that's been marked out by Ms. Gooch.
Okay. And I would think that this senior operations person that we were talking about might very well sit in on those meetings as a way to sort of keep them up to speed and keep in touch with what's happening on our Gantt chart and so forth.
I would really like, Mr. Chairman, to think about how best to get that report. I think it's a critical report. I think we need to stay on top of it, whether one of us sits in on that meeting, whether one of us gets the after-action report from that meeting, whether one of us does something else. I think it's something we ought to discuss after they've had a chance to have this
Yeah,
first
okay.
meeting, we hear back from them. But I think to make sure this stays on track and make sure it takes account of the complexities of the mission, I think hands-on involvement by one of us ought to be, in a supervisory role,
Yeah.
ought to be
Yeah.
something we think about.
Yeah, I agree, and this other person as well, maybe. Okay. Anything else on the work plan and statuses? Item 6, Commissioner Zuniga, did you have anything? There was
Yes, there's finance, there's a couple of expenditures that I'd like
Is
to
that
talk
this-
about.
this form?
That's one of them. As you may recall, I am in my capacity as treasurer, the card holder for the procurement card that we had for incidental non-recurring purchases. And the controller's procedures, which is a robust financial control, stipulates that the cardholder submit to the approver the expenditures on an expenditure log on a monthly basis, because that's prior to the payment going to the cardholder, to the card company. So I have submitted this transaction log for the last month. It incorporates some of the expenditures that we had relative to our public event, our first educational forum, and it also incorporates one shipping cost for UPS, which we had, and we were in the process, and we are now have an account with UPS, which is all part of the state contract. So this shipping cost will no longer be done on the transaction of the procurement card. So I will request a motion to approve the expenditures as presented
You want to
for the procurement card.
So moved.
have a second?
A second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you. The second piece of finance budget update is what I mentioned relative to a request to purchase cell phones. I have submitted a memorandum to that effect. I would note that I should have used titles as opposed to names in this memorandum, because it's really the position that will be assigning or granting a cell phone or a remote communications device. Mostly the business case is outlined here for Director of Communication, for Chief of Staff, and for commissioners who may wish to have a remote device. The plan is all part of the state contract. It's a very cost-effective plan. Having multiple devices allows what's called shared pool of minutes usage. There's a 400-minute allowance for each plan, but if somebody goes over while somebody else goes under, that is sort of averaged out, which is a positive. And again, the main business reason is that we will be conducting our business off-site like today, and communication devices like that are really important for some positions.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have a lot of controversy on that issue.
You know, the costs are outlined here, so I would again also request a motion to approve the costs and for the communication devices as outlined in my memorandum.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nay, the ayes have it. Do we need to vote on everything like this
No.
every week?
You know, while we have a budget, and until we have one, I pose that we do. I am in the process of figuring out a budget and encumbrance that we're supposed to do until the end of the fiscal year. The mechanism for us to do non-recurring transactions was the procurement card, which I will continue to use
Right.
to the effect of, being a one-time non-recurring, it's a synonym, a non-recurring purchase. But I'm working on getting a budget for the end of the fiscal year. Every time we make a commitment, like some of the contracts, that's the vote, so that takes care of that expenditure in whole. We'll just approve against that financial commitment. And then we need to start working on a budget for the subsequent year as well.
Okay. We will have arrived when we're not approving $50 UPS.
That's correct.
Charges.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Number 7, Public Education and Information, Economic Development Forum, Commissioner Stebbins.
We're still looking good. Obviously, June 14th is our next education forum out at Quinsigamond Community College, kicking off at 9 o'clock. We have 2 panels. As we've talked about, the first panel consists of the folks who authored a lot of the key studies and reports that were the impetus for the passage of the original bill, as well as some ongoing market studies. Our second panel is some additional experts from both the policy world and academia to talk about just giving us some additional viewpoints that may not have been factored into or involved in the studies leading up to the promulgation of the bill. So 9 a.m. Out by 12 p.m. I'm working with Janice to look at what costs we're going to need to incur. The college is hosting us graciously and is picking up some of the costs. We just need to figure out what those are in detail. But we're good to go.
And our new Director of Communications and Outreach can start to help with that one, too.
Excellent.
You had the meeting with the travel and tourism people last week.
Actually,
Oh.
it should have occurred to me to check back in when you're talking about meeting with travel and tourism folks the day before the kickoff to the summer vacation, and they had sent me an errant email. They had May 25th on the email. The meeting is actually June 25th, so end of next month I'll
All right.
have something to tell you about.
All right. Okay, the community mitigation, there's, I think that nothing more to report. MAPC is doing this on June 18th. And in Framingham, I'll be getting a draft agenda from them to talk about shortly. You're going to touch base, or did you already? Okay. Okay, just to make sure that the logistics, they're going to handle most of the logistics, but Janice is going to double check with them to make sure we don't miss anything. And that too will pass on to you. And then the 4th, I guess, will be the compulsive gambling forums. And I sent around an email this morning from Marlene Werner from Mass Compulsive Gambling that says they're 99% sure that they're going to handle this for the $5,000 fee that we had agreed also with MAPC to do it. But there were a bunch of other issues that she raised, and I wanted to just run through those. I think I sent you this email, but on June 19th, there's a Mass Partnership on Responsible Gambling meeting. Her email says, "These are folks from all gambling industries, current and future, in Massachusetts or serving Massachusetts residents. We've had a number of people RSVP, lottery, racetracks, potential casinos, and Connecticut casinos. I wanted to let you know, for sake of transparency, that we will be asking them to commit to high collective group standards for people with gambling disorders now and in the future." It's just sort of an FYI, but I wondered whether if anybody has a reaction as to whether one or more of us ought to go to that. They didn't particularly invite us, but I'm sure that we would be invited. Does that seem like something we ought to?
It does to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like something we should,
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a great opportunity to learn. So maybe I'll go back to her and say, I guess, as long as we're not going to be doing any deliberating, it won't be a meeting, so as many of us could go as one, right? If it seems
Right.
Okay. So I will get back to her. Then she says, similarly, would like to know how and when you'd like to hear more regarding what we'd like to see included on problem gambling in the application and licensing process. We'll be asking this group on the 19th to commit to a number of items. We'll advocate for those, but I think we're not ready to talk to them about the application and licensing process yet. Then she says, upon request and in preparation for the meeting, I believe you, meaning me, requested, so this must have been from our meeting. I've informed John Auerbach, who's the head of public health, and Michael Botticelli, I don't know who that is, on the strengths and areas for further exploration, Ray, problem gambling in the statute. Does that mean anything to you? Did we ask them to come in and talk to us about?
I don't recall us
Yeah.
inviting them back at this point, but we can,
Okay.
certainly don't want to hesitate to have them back in. Have a
Okay.
need.
And then the last thing was this meeting, I don't remember if I did send this out, but this looks like, at a minimum, it might be something, since it's in Western Mass, that we might want Commissioner Stebbins to go to. 2012 Massachusetts Problem Gambling Symposium, Raising Awareness and Building Treatment Capacity in Western Massachusetts, this Friday. And she did invite us to this. She had a short notice, but it might be a good thing for you to go to, Commissioner Stebbins, if you're going to be out there, or somebody else, if we can make it. Does that look interesting?
It does. I think I have the flexibility to get there.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else want to go out there for that? I think we're going to have a lot of compulsive gambling stuff here
Right.
going on.
Well, it's important, so that, I mean, we all recognize its importance.
I'll check my calendar and
Okay.
I may be able to go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it gives the right message too, if there's,
Right.
particularly if there's a couple of us
Right.
or more. All right, so I'll say, everybody maybe let me know whether you're interested in doing that and able to do that, and I'll get back to her. Okay, that was it for that. So those are both going well, and that's tentatively, our forum will be tentatively, is now scheduled, still tentative, but almost beyond that, for the 25th. Oh, she asks, she says, we're thinking of having our forum, our compulsive gambling forum, on the North Shore. They were thinking Lynn or Salem, because nothing much had happened up there yet, or in Western Mass. UMass Amherst is available. Do we care either way? Does anybody have an opinion on that? I mean, those are both regions that we haven't been to. Western Mass is a hot spot.
You know, a quick thought is, if one or more of us is going to be attending this event, which obviously looks like, I mean, it's got a number of topics discussed. It's not officially a gaming commission event, but if we're going to have a presence at it, you know, I follow through with their suggestion to maybe go somewhere on the North Shore.
Okay. Yeah, all right, so if there, particularly if there's gonna be at least two of us out there on Friday,
Right.
that would be so we can say we've been out there some, yeah, okay. Okay, so I'll say North Shore. Okay, that's it. Community outreach responses, anything, Commissioner McHugh?
No,
Anything
there
else
have
has
been
come
none
in?
this week.
Okay,
None this week that required discussion here.
okay. Next is new issues. Commissioner Stebbins, the outdoor advertising regulations, do you want to tell us what that one was about?
Sure. You know, I was just sitting here trying to think about how this had popped up on my radar screen, but.
We were all wondering that.
I imagine. In talking with some folks over at Mass DOT, they had made me aware that the Outdoor Advertising Board is going through a pretty extensive regulatory comment and review period, which, from my talking with them, they haven't gone through in a while. Why should we be interested in the Mass Outdoor Advertising Board under Mass DOT? I think as anybody who travels around New England sees outdoor advertising billboards, a majority of the time they are advertising some of the casinos in Connecticut. My expectation is when we license a casino or casinos here in Massachusetts, we'll also see a proliferation of advertising for the casinos, and rightly so. I'm not saying we're not supporting it, but I just thought it was helpful to reach out to the folks at the Outdoor Advertising Board, talk about some of the regulations, some of the major changes, I spoke with Ed Farley, who's the director of the Mass Outdoor Advertising Board last week. This agency is charged with approval and permitting of all off-premise billboard signs and other advertising devices in the Commonwealth. Shared with me a lot about their agency, what they're responsible for. They have a great interactive map which outlines the roads that they have authority over as well as where they have billboard locations. They have some of the regulatory changes of note is that they are producing or hearing comments and regulations on what we'd call electronic billboards. These are the multiple message, sometimes flashing or motion changing signs that they've done some pilot studies on. They've had pilot locations around the state, and now they're formulating some regulations to the operation of those, as well as a provision which says a new sign cannot be located in land that isn't zoned for industrial or commercial use. You also walk through some of the space requirements that they have. I guess, my overall goal for putting this on the agenda is not necessarily that we need to comment or look at the regulations and weigh in, but I think it's interesting to note places where our responsibilities have a serious overlap or connection with the activities and actions of other agencies around state government. I fully expect we will see new billboards go up. Obviously, local authorities have their own zoning ordinances when it comes to on-premise signage. But again, I just thought it was an interesting connection for us. I mentioned Mr. Farley. It might be worthwhile at some point with the, if we're all in agreement, to have him come in and talk about the role of his agency and how they monitor and oversee, billboards, as well as some of these new regulations. But again, I just think it's one example of where we will have an impact or have an overlap with some of the responsibilities of another state agency.
Yeah, I think actually it's very interesting because, we could regulate it too. This is one of the many areas that if we cared to intercede in our licensing process, we could say you will do no more than such and such, or you will do as many as such and such, or, this is just one of thousands of issues where we have the authority to play. Never mind, we want to coordinate with what other public agencies are doing, but we have the authority, like on our ethics rules, we have to write ethics rules which are more rigorous than the rules that everybody else operates by. And I'm not quite sure how we get our arms around the whole host of issues like this. I think as the months go by, they'll be surfacing. But this is it's almost a philosophic question. Yes, we should be in touch and coordinate and be aware of and keep them informed. But how far do we want to put our regulatory tentacles? We can put into the licensing process whatever we want to put into the licensing process.
Right.
So I just think it's kind of an interesting question for us to begin to think about.
There was a major investigation in New Jersey around billboards in Atlantic City with elected and appointed officials who, realizing this would be a profitable business, actually had ownership in the billboards. And that became the question of, you're an owner, but you have some oversight into who's approved. So it became, so it is an issue of concern that at some level I suspect we need to pay attention to.
I have a question. Do they, I'm just not familiar with the regulations, but is there anything relative to, there must be relative to the subject matter of their advertising? Is there a limit to what they stipulate relative to?
I will go back and look at the draft regs. I don't think there was much that can fall under their authority relative to the nature of what's on the sign.
Okay.
Most of it had to do with updating a lot of permits, fees, process for rescinding a license, but the big major piece are these new electronic billboards and
Yeah.
kind of the changing sign, which I dealt with a little bit in Springfield when I was on the city council. It's certainly a more valuable sign for an advertising company to have, because then you can sell multiple ad spots without having to construct 5 or 6 different signs around the city. But I'll go back and look to see if their regs or comments even address that. But again, just an issue, an area that may have some overlap with us. And the director of the Mass Outdoor Advertising Board has also a wide range of authority to determine whether a sign is going to have a safety impact, it's going to have an impact on the picturesque nature of wherever the sign is going. So they do have some pretty broad authority under their own regulations and scope of work.
Yeah. Well, let's just keep them on the list of folks that we're going to have come in and talk to us as we start, just like the cultural council, all the different ones we've talked about.
Sure.
It's a good idea. Interesting, thank you. Okay, 8B, speaking engagements. This came up because we are increasingly getting invitations to speak. And when we get them, promotional materials are going out saying we're coming, and we're being used. Both Commissioner and I spoke just recently, and I've got another one coming up, and we're being used as headline speakers to help attract an audience. This tends to be annual meetings. Sometimes they're for-profit companies, sometimes they're not-for-profit, or government agencies like planning councils most recently. And I have put copies of these in the packets for the press because I wanted them as well as us to see the kinds of issues we're talking about. And then so I went to the Ethics Commission to say, are there any issues here? What issues should we be aware of if we're asked to be headline speakers or speakers? And I sent these 2 examples. One is something I'm doing at the Mount Washington Bank. Another one is the one that Commissioner McHugh just did at the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development Council. I sent them over to the Ethics Commission and said, are there any issues here? We know we can't be doing this if the sponsor is in the business. That's for starters. And we always ask that question, and we should make sure we always ask that question. But beyond that, I said, are there any other concerns? Well, let me say that slightly differently. If it's being sponsored by somebody in the business, that's probably something we can't do. If the program involves people from the business, that's something we need to think about very carefully. How are we set up? There are going to be people that are going to want to do programs about gambling. That's going to be understandable. And they're going to want to have people from the industry as well as regulators and so forth. But that's something to be very careful about. It's not a bar, but it's something to be very careful about. We certainly cannot take any remuneration. When I had mine, when I was invited to do this thing for the Mount Washington Bank, they said, we can make a contribution in your honor to your favorite charity. And I said, no, that would not be appropriate. So no kind of compensation. But beyond that, can we do that? Because I was a little bit concerned that having our names emblazoned as an attraction to come, it might be an issue. And the bottom line was that it was not. They reviewed these 2 examples. I talked at considerable length with Karen Nober, who's the director. I've asked her if she would come and speak with us here so we could talk about this. And they decided that they wouldn't do that. They don't like to give advice publicly. But she did write me an email, which she said I could distribute, and I also want to read it just for the public record. Steve, as discussed, the members of the Gaming Commission may speak at events in their official capacity about gaming issues. They may be listed on the event agendas with their titles since they're acting officially. If you and the other members are generally accepting all such invitations, I don't think any issues are raised. Likewise, I don't think issues are raised as long as you are treating similarly situated entities the same way. However, if you're providing access to the commission to some entities by speaking at their events and not to others, You may wish to develop some objective criteria for commissioners to use as the basis for accepting or declining speaking engagements. As always, if you have concerns about a specific event, please feel free to call. I would not be comfortable giving advice on the conflict law during an open meeting of the commission. So I think it's pretty straightforward. I think at the moment, our assumption is we're going to be accepting as many of these as possible. It's part of our job to get out there. We want to be able to talk to people about what's going on. We've now developed a fairly standard presentation, which will evolve as time evolves. But we could, members of the press who aren't here, who regularly cover us, maybe we could send them to them, because I would like to have people see this. So, any questions about that?
I was began looking at various things that other gaming commissions are doing, and the Pennsylvania Gaming Commission has a policy, and I think it would be, it's out there for the public, for everybody to take a look at, under what conditions will we come, what kinds of audience do we anticipate, what we expect, and lays out the conditions. Right. And I think that we work with Director Driscoll and have her good advice as to how to develop such a policy, and then put it up, and there we are.
And she's already suggested, she had seen that thing in the
right.
Pennsylvania phenomenon also,
right.
and suggested that we could be more, we want to be out there, we can be more proactive, we should set up a speakers bureau, we should have on the website
right.
what the rules are, and all the places we're speaking, so that's a good idea, and I think she's already on that.
Great.
Okay, anything else like that? All right, number 9, a few odds and ends that have come up, or that I just didn't remember to put on here. We got a memo on, I guess last week at this time, upcoming and expired deadlines, which was great, from the law firm, pulling out of the legislation all the different deadlines that we need to adhere to. But in reading over this, it just reminded me, and I guess you're very familiar with this, but on July 31, that's the transition date of us taking over bazaars and raffles, apparently.
Yes, our supervision of bazaars at least, for charitable gaming commences on that date, and we've committed to have a report to the legislature before that date, the report that we were supposed to have by April 12th, I believe, and so we're working on that, and we'll have that. And we'll have the ground prepared for our takeover of that supervision. It's supervision cabined by the responsibility of the Department of Public Charities, and the AG's office continues to have a role there, and we have to work out what that role is. And there are others. The treasurer has a continuing role over Beano. And so exactly where we fit in that, or how much we're going to take on board, is unclear at the moment, but it doesn't look like a lot. And in any event, we'll have a plan and protocol in place for the commission to look at and approve well before July 31st.
Okay. So our role will be to respond to something you're going to put together.
Yes.
When you're ready for a group discussion on this.
Right.
Okay, great. Then on the second page of this is July 15th, reporting by municipalities to the Gaming Commission of any political contributions.
That's a misprint, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I went over that with the
Oh.
lawyers this morning. That is not an accurate
Oh, all right.
statement. There's a typo in there, let me say. And that's not an accurate statement. The reporting is by applicants to the cities and towns. That's done after there is an applicant. We have no applicants now, and so that is a preview of coming attractions.
Okay, and zero relevance to July.
Zero relevance to this July 15th.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, great. Well, thinking that there was relevance to that,
Sure.
it reminded me of the municipal outreach issue that we've talked about, and I was thinking this would be something we had to tell them to do, tell the municipalities to do. Apparently it isn't, but Commissioner Stebbins and I are going to get together with the representative from the Collins Center, right?
Yes,
Sometime.
I'm waiting on some dates back from him. Hopefully he's available sometime next week.
Okay, to follow up on the idea of coordinating outreach and support to the municipalities who are wrestling with being a host or a surrounding community.
And as it relates to the June 14th forum, the MMA distributed our meeting announcement, as well as we've also connected out with the umbrella organization for the Chambers of Commerce across Massachusetts to also extend our event information.
Okay, great. And we talked last week about a research agenda. We did get a report from the lawyers that talks about the research that's referenced in the legislation. We now have a proposal. We haven't really quite talked about how we're going to get our arms around that.
No, I'd like to see the law firm's document, and my hope was to pull together a memo that kind of, there's some information that's clearly outlined in the legislation. There's some broader discussion topics, which I think we should have a discussion about, as well as we need to be mindful of kind of the funding avenues for how these surveys and kind of benchmark or benchline research gets done.
Okay. Did you not get that? I thought you sent. Did other people get the outline of the research? Maybe it just came to me.
I don't think I
Oh,
did.
all right, okay. Okay, I'll send that around. It's somewhere, somehow, we need to figure out how we kind of brainstorm up, research agenda. Probably it's going to be at a meeting like this in some fashion or other, but it's a big topic. It needs to get moving pretty soon. We have sort of bits and pieces. There's a little bit of work that Commissioner Stebbins has been doing. I've been doing a little thinking about it, but I think we need a pretty hefty process by which we just really chew through all the things that are both required of us, and there are things we're going to want to do that are, I think, that are beyond what's required.
I sent out a little note to our panelists for the June 14th forum, asking them specifically for their thoughts and feedback as to, again, this gets to the tools that we need to make decisions on a license application, but also addressing the provision where it talks about the benchline research and their thoughts, information we should have, what should we be measuring. So hopefully at the 14th, some of the speakers will be able to give us some ideas and some suggestions as to what we should be doing with that respect.
Okay, great. All right, well,
There also is a great deal of, I mean, the chart that the law firm sent has a number of studies, and if we put together some kind of an internal discussion memo and listen to some external input at some of these forums, and there are parts of the license application that require the applicants to present studies.
Right.
And we need to have our own baseline for determining the validity of those studies.
Right.
I think we could put together an approach and an outline of components, at least, that would make for a fruitful discussion here at that point. And I think we need to have that kind of data in front of us, those kinds of considerations in front of us, and then think about the kind of studies that we can tee off of those.
I think it's helpful not only in assessing those studies, but as well as if we decide to go out and do an RFR for services for an outside entity to help us with evaluating the license applicant's information as well.
Right.
But, as Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out, I mean, we're starting this new. There's some great opportunities for us to kind of get the jump on doing that benchline information, as well as looking at study groups. People, we've talked about a whole number of categories where we can begin to follow some trends prior to a casino's opening, and then after they've been in business at certain intervals throughout the coming years.
yeah, it's a really, really rare opportunity to do something really thorough. And as you look at that report that I sent around this morning, there is just a dearth of quality research about what are the socio and economic impacts of any kind of gambling on a community. It's amazing but there just is very little out there, and this would be an opportunity to do a study that could be pretty extraordinary, above and beyond anything which is required in the legislation. So we'll try to tee this up a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more about how to tee this up.
The other area that's in there, I mean, these are studies of well, I don't know exactly what. That's one thing we need to discuss. But that whole concept, it seems to me, goes down to a pretty fine level. And I was thinking about when this all gets up and running, there is going to be a fund, among others, for community impact. And beginning to measure now, before there is anything, what concerns the community is worried about, it seems to me is something we ought to think about, helping them think about. For example, traffic is an obvious concern these days, and will be as the casinos are up and running. Would it make sense for communities now to begin to do traffic studies when there's nothing there, so that there's some benchmark against which to measure the traffic that is there when the casino is up? Are there other things that can be measured now to provide a baseline against which to measure the impact with good data after the device is there? And can we identify those things, and can we help towns who are asking us questions to think about that and provide them with some ideas as to things that they may want to investigate, and that may provide a benchmark for us making decisions down the road when we are called upon to do so. So
I think, this exercise of the mitigation forum being organized by MAPC is helpful, because, the regional planning agencies across the state should have a lot of this just
Right.
base level data,
Yeah.
as well as information we might find at mass highways or anywhere else. I mean,
Right.
there may be information out there that's a good benchmark that people have been collecting by rote and just have been doing it, but now we need to actually pull it out and use it in a
Right.
beneficial way.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think we'll probably go through something publicly fairly soon on this, I think. Okay, that was it. Anything else under other business? Any other missing pieces? Anything else about anything else? Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, folks.